Welcome to Plain Talk. Our guest this Friday, we're Chad Oban. A rare moment when he's not vacationing on a Friday. Chad, I'm so happy to have you.
You know, it's tough to be a volunteer. But here's what I was thinking. I should go on vacation today. That's what I was thinking yesterday. And then I got the notification that Zac Ista was going to be our guest today. And I was like, I don't want to miss this. You cannot miss this quality podcasting.
Well, as I said before we started, when Representative Ista, when I booked him, he actually requested that Corey Mock be the co-host for today's show. So
and I think that's a fair ask because Ista knows that I'm about to grill him. I'm gonna go after this guy.
You know, what Chad doesn't know is the podcasting elites in North Dakota. There's talks. They think Chad has lost his fastball. There's a newer, younger, more exciting co-host option in Corey Mock.
Let me defend
There's
Chad.
precedent now this summer, Chad.
It's mine,
Chad Oban has the profile of a crafty lefty. Does he have the miles per hour on his fastball that he used to have in his youth? No. But he's developing a slider, right? He's moving towards a cutter. He knows how to pitch.
Crafty. I like the word crafty.
Yeah, that's right.
What I am.
I'm just glad you have welcomed a humble, lowly Minnesota Twins fan to this coastal elitist baseball podcast. We've got Yankees, we've got Dodgers, you've got Kelly on with his Mets. Does nobody speak for the common man and the Minnesota Twins anymore?
I love the Minnesota Twins. I wish the Yankees.
Well, I'm sure Yankees fans
Twins every day. I wish we were playing the Twins tonight. It would be fantastic. Absolutely delightful. All right. We're not here to talk about that. And we're not going to talk about some exacting, tortuous analysis of the vice president's racial history. We're going to save that for the second half of the show. Instead, we're going to talk about North Dakota legislative races. Representative Ista is now the minority leader in the House of Representatives, which, by the way, I keep getting wrong because you guys did the timing weird on me. So I keep thinking that Representative Boucher is still the minority leader. He is not. Representative Ista is the minority leader. And we wanted to have him on to talk about some of these legislative races across the state. And I guess my first question for you, Zac, is the assumption is, and I don't mean this to be glib or all joking aside, but the assumption is that Republicans are just going to steamroll again in North Dakota. And I suspect you probably have a rebuttal to that. And I'm curious is, do you see some opportunities for pickups? And if so, where?
Yeah, absolutely we do. Look, we've got a lot of great enthusiasm in the North Dakota Democratic NPL. It started at our convention this spring. We've got Katrina Christensen and Trigby Hammer and Merrill Pepcorn. They're just, you can't turn around in the state without seeing them at a picnic or at a parade or at a coffee shop.
Yeah, by the way, I would have loved to have been at that convention. I was a little busy across town. There were some events going on at the Republican events.
True. You would have seen a kind of a night and day difference. We just had a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. Having those three at the top of the ticket is great. I'm not going to lie. Now with Vice President Harris leading the presidential ticket, there's a new, pep in our step as Democrats here in North Dakota. So, I think we are going to do well. Rob, you've written in the past that we do struggle to even fill some of our ballot races, right, for the legislature. We're not there yet. We haven't filled them all, but we do have candidates running in over 80% of the districts on the ballot. We have candidates, of course, in Grand Forks and Fargo and Bismarck and Mandan, but you can find candidates out in Valley City or up in Stanley. And, as we compare it to just 2 years ago, we've increased the number of candidates by more than a third. So momentum is going in the right direction. So absolutely, I think we have some outstanding incumbents who find themselves back before the voters for the first time that are going to do very well. We have some outstanding new candidates that I think are going to really surprise some folks because they're putting in the hard work. They're getting out there, knocking on doors, talking to voters, making sure people see that this is a neighbor. This is somebody whose kids go to the same school as mine, who goes to the same church as me. This isn't just somebody with a D and a parentheses behind their name. So that's how we're going to win, I think, this November.
Zac, why does it matter? When you think about the legislative caucuses with these super majorities on the Republican side, obviously the math doesn't work that Democrats are all of a sudden going to be in the majority in this state. But why does it matter that there's, another handful of Democrats in the House, another handful of Democrats in the Senate in terms of policy that affects people in this state?
Well, look, last session, we were there. We had only 16 total Democrats in the entire legislature. But with those 16, over 50 bills that were introduced by Democrats were passed and signed into law. So we do, roll up our sleeves, get our hands dirty, work across the aisle, and make sure some of these good policy solutions are advanced. But we're also in the room when discussions are happening on the biggest issues: taxes, investments in the state budget. And I think the more and more you have those diverse voices, diverse perspectives, you're going to get better policy. I think most North Dakotans believe that bipartisanship is good, that compromise is good. And if we can go from, 16 Democrats to 20 to 25, you're just going to have more voices in there, making sure that we're, one, reflective of the cross-section of voters across the state, and two, bringing good ideas to the table.
It's funny. I have been an advocate, and at this point, am treated like an apostate for bringing this up. But I've long argued that one of the reasons why North Dakota Republicans have had the majorities they've had in North Dakota for, really, 30 years, 3 decades is when it started, with the election of former Governor Ed Schaefer. But, I've argued that one of the reasons Republicans is they haven't been afraid to steal a Democratic idea. And sometimes to the chagrin of Democrats who maybe have at times, I wouldn't say it's always been an act of partisanship. Sometimes it's, you take the Democrat idea out of the Democratic bill, you put it in a Republican bill, and then kill the Democratic bill. I'm not sure that's the right way to go around it, but I've always liked the pragmatism. I think the North Dakota Republicans have been very pragmatic. I think that's been their key to success, but it's an unpopular idea right now. And I think that, and I don't know if it'll be this cycle, but I think if that attitude continues to manifest itself in Republicans, I think you're going to see openings for Democrats in North Dakota.
Yeah, I think you're right, Rob. When it comes to specific bills or policies, who gets credit is secondary to whether we've enacted good legislation for the people of North Dakota. There's no doubt that folks like Ryan Braunberger in the Senate, who's up for re-election this cycle, was a leader on childcare policy. But at the end of the day, the Republicans, put their name to the childcare investment that passed last session. We can quibble about credit. What I know is that more parents are able to afford childcare, more providers are able to stay in business. And by the way, let's double down on those investments next session. But, I think we can speak directly to your listeners who, usually or always find themselves voting for Republicans. And in North Dakota, it's probably a fair number of your listeners. We could have the greatest election night in the history of the modern North Dakota Democratic NPL. There's not a universe in which I am packing up my minority leader's office and moving to the majority leader's office. We don't have enough candidates on the ballot. So for your Republican listeners and those that tend to vote Republican in the state, I think that gives you a lot of freedom to demand more of the candidates on the ballot this year. You don't have to hold your nose and vote for somebody who is in step with whatever crazy conspiracy theories floating on cable TV or on Twitter or some dark corners of the internet. You can vote for somebody who's going to care about local issues here in North Dakota, that's going to care about bipartisanship, that's going to, like you said, advance those pragmatic policies. And you're not taking on some risks that all of a sudden North Dakota is going to turn into California or whatever, Vermont, whatever state scares you the most. So I hope those Republican voters across the state will look at the individual candidates. Don't just jump to the end of the book and see what letters behind their name. Give them a real fair shot this cycle.
I don't know what Representative Ista's got against Vermont. I hear it's lovely.
I don't think Representative Ista, but some of our listeners might have something against Vermont. Zac, last session you were on the House Finance and Tax Committee, I believe. There seemed to be a bit of a fight on where we should spend our time in terms of taxes. You have the Democrats in the Senate, Republicans wanting to focus more on property taxes. You have the House Republicans in the governor's office wanting to focus more on income taxes. I'm of the position that we might have made a mistake by not doing enough on property taxes, which has led to the ballot measure. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, where you're at on the ballot measure to eliminate property taxes? But one of the proponents' best arguments from my perspective is, why should we believe the legislature is going to do something now when they have done some, but not enough from a lot of property owners' perspective? So how do you feel about the measure? How do you balance property tax and income tax relief? And why should they believe the legislature now is going to do something on property taxes?
Well, Chad, I'm against that measure. I'm going to be voting no on it. I voted no when we had the opportunity as the legislature to advance it to the ballot directly. I can't overstate the chaos that it will thrust our 2025 session into if it were to pass. It will not just be the dominant issue. It'll be issues 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that we have to deal with. There will not be enough time to consider other bold reforms, other bold investments, because that will be the singular issue that takes up the legislative days next year if it passes. But you're right, Chad. I think voters are right to feel angry, are right to feel like every time they get their property tax statement, it's just going up and up and up. And the skepticism that anybody's going to do anything about it is warranted. There was a key difference between the Democratic caucus and the Bergman administration. The Bergman administration decided to take a hands-off approach and say there really isn't a state solution to property taxes. I think the Democratic caucus disagreed. Our candidate for governor, Mayor Pepcourt, introduced a bill to provide direct payments to homeowners. He introduced a bill for $1,000 credit. Pretty soon, folks across the state are going to be getting their new property tax statements, and most are going to see that $500 credit that ended up in the final version of legislation. So what I think we need to do going forward is one, to recognize we're going to have the new leadership in the governor's office, whether that's Governor Pepker. And I think Congressman Armstrong has also indicated that he's going to make a renewed effort to address property taxes and prioritize that over further income tax cuts. We'll get back to property tax in a second, but let's just remember, because of legislation passed last session, you and I went around and around on this, Rob, ultimately I voted for it. Nobody that's an individual pays a dime in state income tax in the first $45,000 or so in income. No married couple pays a dime in the first $75,000, and nobody pays more than 2.5% on any dollar they earn. So I think we have more than fairly set our income tax rates in North Dakota. But what can we do on property taxes? One, I think it's continuing that direct relief back to the taxpayer. Let's continue the $500, and let's have a conversation of, can that go up to $750? Can that go up to $1,000? Let's fix some issues to make sure those that own their home in trust aren't left out inadvertently from this. Two, are there areas for the state to further its investment in some of those pressures that lead to your cities, your counties, your subdivisions increasing their property taxes? Obviously, the state already makes a lot of investment in K-12 education, a lot of investment in infrastructure. Are there opportunities to do more, right? We know our state checking account, savings account, investment account, they are all flush. Should we be drawing on those to bring down these cost pressures that contribute to the property tax increase? That's the carrot for the cities and counties. I think we have to get more comfortable talking about sticks, right? Do we need to look at capping the rate of increase? Do we need to look at capping the number of mills they can do? Do we need to look at limiting how quickly your property valuation can increase? Do we need to look at tying, the state investment back to the localities, with those localities instituting some sort of reform? And that might not make us a whole lot of friends with our leaders at the city and county level, but voters are right to be skeptical that anything we do at the state is keeping these increases in check. So it might be time to get a little more firm with guardrails in that regard.
I'm glad to hear that, because I think one of the reasons when you were talking about the Burgum administration taking a hands-off approach, I liked it because the thing I don't want to do is more buy downs, because I don't think they work. I feel like it's the worst of all worlds, right? Like the property tax measure is going to eliminate the property tax and put all the burden for funding that onto the state. But what the buy downs do is essentially bringing the burden of paying for property taxes onto the state without eliminating the tax, which seems worse to me. Like you're increasing the burden on the state budget without decreasing the burden on Rob's property tax bill at all. Because, we may have slowed the growth of property taxes, but we have not decreased them. I don't think anybody barring some unusual set of circumstances, I don't think anybody in North Dakota could say I'm paying less in property taxes than I was 4 or 5 years ago. So I mean, that's the thing I'm afraid is if and again, I'm not supporting this measure. I don't like the measure. I think it's a bad idea. I don't want to just get rid of the property tax and then just punt and we'll figure it out. Your contention that this would throw our 2025 session into chaos, agree with it 100%. But what I'm afraid is that we're just going to get more bad ideas from the legislature that's going to include just, and part of the problem here is I think voters want to live in a fantasy world where they can have lots of parks and lots of local services and really low property taxes. And you can't have it both ways. There's got to be a cost. And I'm afraid our solution to it is just going to be keep hiding that problem in the state budget until we can't do it anymore. That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, I would agree with you. We all, voters, officials alike, want our taxes to be as low as possible and our services and benefits in the state to be as great as possible. That's human nature.
It's kind of downstream from what we do at the federal level, right? Where we want big, expansive federal programs and we want low federal taxes, and we deliver, costing ourselves $1 trillion budget deficit every year. Like that's
right. But just shifting this cost burden onto the state coffers, there will not be an appetite for these pie-in-the-sky draconian cuts that I think supporters of this measure think will just paper over the new cost to the state. What's more likely to happen is you're going to have to see increases in fees, increases in fines, increases in sales tax, which worries me. We know working in middle-class families bear that's a higher burden on them than something like the income tax. So there's just too many questions. But we as the legislature, the incoming administration, we have to listen to the voters on this. It is a very serious issue. There is absolutely a pathway for a measure like this to pass because of voters' frustration. It's past time from pulling our heads out of the sand, and let's really get down on this and see what we can do.
Zac, one of the things that you led on last session was the idea of ending lunch shaming and providing free or reduced school lunches for folks. I think there was some progress that was made. So more kids were eligible for free lunch. We're seeing a lot more states doing universal free meals. Rob and I have talked a lot about if you want to put money in the pockets of working families, this is a really great way to put money in
which by the way, surprised me that talking point wasn't used more. Because again, I think there's a lot of people like me. I pay more for school lunches than I do for income tax. And I say that as a full-on supporter of the income tax cuts. But I mean, you want to deliver an impact and talk about it that way. Like you talk about universal free lunch, I think you're going to turn North Dakota voters off. You talk about like giving some relief to working families, which it is, and it is an accurate way of talking about it. I think that's much more appetizing.
So Zac, can you talk a little bit about how that increased access to people on the lower end of the income scale has worked? And what do you think the plan is moving forward? Is this something that Dems and some of your Republican colleagues are going to push for again next session?
Absolutely it is. I mean, it is not just popular. I believe it's the right thing to do. Like Rob said, in a state like North Dakota, we have a low income tax burden to begin with. We don't do refundable tax credits like you see from your federal income taxes. So you're not getting those checks back through the tax code. This is a very direct way to put money back in the pockets of working families across North Dakota. What we've seen, Chad, as we implemented the increase, we're anticipating about 10,000 more school children getting the benefit of no-cost school meals. We've seen a good uptake on that. We've also seen the cost estimate was a little high. It's coming a bit lower than the cost estimate when we passed last session. So I think that gives me a little optimism that we can get that price tag down on what the investment would be. I live in Grand Forks, so we're competing for workforce with Minnesota. They've got universal school meals across the river in Minnesota. I think ultimately families across the country are going to look at what we did during the pandemic and say this is a benefit that should be provided when we send our kids to school. I think ultimately there's going to be a federal solution, but let's not wait for that here in North Dakota. Like I said, we have the financial resources to make some bold investments. I think this is popular. Our candidates who are out there knocking doors, talking with voters, they hear it time and time again that this just makes sense. So in addition to taking that off the plate, let's find a way to make more investments in childcare. That's another way to get money back in the pockets of our working families. That's really what the property tax debate is about, right? How do we bring down costs in an era where inflation has really been a gut punch to so many families? I think school lunches is one way. I think childcare costs is another.
I'm hoping that because some of the battles around like school lunches got very partisan. I have spoken to, in fact, earlier this week, I was talking to a very well-known Republican who you would both know is very active, who just out of the blue told me we got to get this school lunch thing done. There's appetite for it among Republicans. What I'm afraid of, though, is sometimes these issues turn into these, I don't know, almost a culture war issue where people are just entrenched and we forget about whether or not it would, represent serving our public. How do we get over that hump and just say this isn't a culture war? This is just about everybody, support for compulsory education is basically universal. So, and we all agree that because we have compulsory education, that we should have public schools, right? We don't want it just a private option. We believe there should be public schools for North Dakotans to be able to send their kids to. Obviously, if you want to opt out and go to private school, hey, great for you. But if we're going to say the kids have to go to school and we're going to have public schools, why would we not just provide the lunches that they're eating while they're there? Like, nobody's asking me to pay for the textbooks. I'm not paying for, to me, it's just a school supply. Like, they're there, let them eat. Let's just solve this problem. We can do it. And it's one more hassle off the school districts, one more hassle off the backs of parents. But how do we get past the culture war aspect of it?
I think it's one of those contrived culture wars. I've seen data recently that nearly 90% of North Dakotans support the concept of universal school meals. So maybe the 10% or so that are against it are just louder voices. It's just such a universal win to me. We know that well-fed students are better students. They're more attentive. Behavioral problems go down. Education impact goes up. It takes that pressure off the teachers who have to deal with those issues in their classrooms. And then there's the direct financial impact to families. I mean, I'm really going to have some skin in the game. My oldest is starting kindergarten this fall. And, we're going to go through all those emotions about what that means and all the excitement. But I look at a couple of things. One is all of the new school supplies we had to go buy and the hit to the pocketbook on that. Two, the cost of lunch every day. But on the back end, I'm going to save about $1,000 a month in childcare expenses by my child going to public school instead of the paid for childcare center he goes to. These are real difference-making dollar amounts for working families in North Dakota. And when we as a state find ourselves at a time where our financial situation is strong, how can we make these investments that families can maybe realize these a little bit earlier after their child is born rather than waiting until they start kindergarten?
Well, I certainly hope that Republican elected officials can support this idea and don't look at it as this is a Democrat idea, so therefore it's bad, or Governor Walz has championed it, so therefore it's bad. I think looking at this from the perspective of good policy, it shouldn't matter if it comes from a Democrat or a Republican. Speaking of, we talked very deeply about taxes, school lunch, a lot of different things. Last session, it seemed like rather than having really deep conversations about those kind of things, we're focused a lot on things like banning books, how we're going to deal with, to allow trans kids to live in our society. And it was people like Jim Casper and folks like that are on the ballot. Zac, how can the Democrats make voters and moderate Republicans understand that we're not focused on those issues that affect them most, like the things you just talked about, taxes and lunch, and instead, because of folks like Jim Casper and the people he's running with, we're focused on book bans and whatever parental rights means and that kind of thing. How do we get voters to understand? And hell, Rob and I talk about this all the time. We want to be arguing about tax policy. We don't want to be arguing about trans kids, right? Absolutely. So how do we get people to focus on those things and make sure that we're electing legislators, both sides of the aisle, that will focus on the issues that are affecting working people the most?
Look, it takes hard work, right? Nobody's changing their mind or going to the polls because they saw a 30-second ad on TV or some B-roll before they listen to a YouTube clip or even some postcard in the mail. You got to get out to the neighborhoods, knock on people's doors, call their phone and do it. And, I'm pretty proud of the candidates that are running under the Democratic MPL banner this year because they are out there doing that work. And, what I would urge your listeners to do, the vast majority of folks in North Dakota don't just pick a Republican or Democrat. They want to evaluate the strength of an individual candidate. So I think what they need to ask is when they're making the choices, which of the candidate is willing to work across the aisle, that values bipartisanship, that values compromise, and which candidates are just committed to some rigid national ideology, right? Which candidates are going to prioritize the issues that matter in your neighborhood, in your town, in your county, and which ones are going to prioritize whatever they saw on some cable news channel that morning, right? I think you should demand that your candidates are going to the legislature to be a workhorse, to really roll up their sleeves, get their fingernails dirty, and not just be that show horse that wants to tweet out things and get headlines about how inflammatory they are. I was joking with my family this morning that we've had this test in politics for a while of who do you want to have a beer with? I'd ask now, who do you want to watch the Olympics with? Do you want to watch it with somebody who is going down these weird rabbit holes about a forgettable bit during the opening ceremonies or some boxer you've never heard of from a country you can't find on the map? Or do you want to watch it with some folks that are just cheering for Simone Biles and Katie Ledecky and Sha'Carri Richardson to just keep dominating while they hold up the American flag on the gold medal stand? I mean, that's really a question for voters, right? We have to start looking at the whole picture here, not just reflexively voting for an R because you're a Republican or a D because you're a Democrat. The quality of the candidates matter. Better candidates make better legislators. I hope voters really put in the time to figure that out this cycle, rather.
Zac, you put your finger on something that I've been thinking about a lot and wondering kind of in the Trump era, which in a lot of ways sort of corresponds with the era where, sort of online politics really hit the mainstream. And I could say that because I was an early practitioner of online politics going back to the early 2000s. And we weren't mainstream. I mean, it had an impact, but I feel like 2012, 2016 is really, really when the masses got involved. And with it came this appetite, almost seemingly unquenchable, for minutia, culture war, whatever you want to call it. I keep wondering, is there a moment at which that appetite is going to be satisfied? Is there a moment where somebody who's I guess what I would call like the outrage of the day, where we're upset because some kid in a school district got expelled because he's wearing an NRA shirt, and now the whole nation is convulsed about it, or a boxer boxing controversy or whatever? Like, is it going to reach a point where we're just tired of it? Like, we're just like roll our eyes, like, please, I don't care. Like, I just want to watch the Olympics and enjoy it and have fun. And by the way, this is right and left. I mean, this is a bipartisan problem with our society right now. And I just wonder, I mean, is there a point, and I'm asking poor Representative Ista to answer this.
It has to. It has to, Rob. We can't keep going like this. Just, finding outrage after outrage after outrage. We're in a bubble. All of us are in the same bubble here, right? We care about this stuff. We think about this stuff. We are better off if we put our phones aside, get off the social media, don't just scroll through all of this. And, I think one of the things that I've been so impressed by with the rollout of Kamala Harris's campaign is I think it's a reminder that you can bring joyfulness to politics. It doesn't have to be this somber, aggressive, angry endeavor. She approaches the task of campaigning both with a seriousness of purpose and a joyfulness. And I think North Dakota and the United States really respond to this optimism, this positive view of the future, right? We can choose to go down this path where we litigate every dumb controversy that outrages somebody, or we can realize that those one-off instances have been happening forever. They just weren't broadcast to the world over social media before, and we can choose to ignore them. We can just choose to ignore them. They don't have to earn our attention, earn our anger. Let's focus on the things that bring us together. There's going to be passionate disagreements. There are serious ramifications that can happen with bad policy, but that doesn't mean we can't just keep our eye on the prize and make sure we're focusing on those big picture things that really move our state and country forward in the right direction.
Representative Ista, thanks for your time.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Just finished up with Representative Zac Ista, who's I probably should have put that at the beginning. He's a Democrat from Grand Forks and the minority leader. I think I did mention the fact that he's the minority leader. In the context of me being confused that I keep forgetting that he's the minority leader now.
I hope people listen to that interview because, I mean, Zac really does approach this stuff through the lens of pragmatism and doing things that are right and not through a partisan lens. And don't get me wrong, you have to do that when you're in the super minority. But I hope that people will listen to what he's saying and what Democrats want to try to help do next session and focus on the things that are helping families.
You know, that's one of the things, I mean, that's the point I've been trying to make to Republicans is the key to your success, North Dakota Republicans, has been pragmatism. It's been a willingness to listen to Democrats and taking their ideas, sometimes stealing their ideas when they have good ones. That has been the key to success. So if the thing is that we're just not going to do that anymore, you're going to start to lose seats. That's just reality. But there's this overweening desire to just be rapid partisanship and pretend like the people you're governing with don't matter. And it's ultimately, and again, I don't know if it'll be this cycle, but ultimately that will cost Republicans if they keep going down that road. And the funny thing is, I get it. When you're in the minority, it's like in the Senate, right? The minority party always loves the filibuster, and the majority party always hates it.
Right.
And also when you're in the minority, you love bipartisanship, and when you're in the majority, it's, hey, we won, we're going to do what we want. And I'm telling you that we won attitude costs you. Ask Barack Obama, by the way, who came out, told Republicans he won, and saw, Democrats got slaughtered across the country in successive elections after that. So the we won attitude doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, and I also think Zac's point about just having different voices in the conversation. Listen, Zac's caucus isn't winning many of these conversations, but to have different voices in the room that are sort of giving a different perspective on things, I think is really, really important. And we're not talking about, Senate committees are like 5-1 or 6-0, right? Republicans versus Democrats.
There's not enough Democrats to cover some of these committees.
Yeah, so and I think that does a disservice in terms of policy. And often, if you only have one Democrat on a committee and you want to make a motion, you need somebody to second that motion. So you do need to work bipartisan if you're a Democrat. But I enjoy the way Zac looks at this stuff. I think it's him having young kids. He can relate to some of the stuff that's happening with working families in this state. I just think it's interesting. And I hope people give him a shot.
Well, one of the most, your point about younger lawmakers, and listen, having older lawmakers is important too. That is not an invalid perspective. But I think the pendulum has swung too far in that direction. And I'm not a huge fan of the idea of a full-time legislature, but one of the selling points that does appeal to me about it is the idea that we're going to make it easier for working people who are in the middle of their life or at the beginning of their career or whatever, make it easier for them to serve.
Yeah, because it does, like, if you're a legislator and a citizen legislator and you're Zac's age, like in your 30s, it's your prime earning years, but it's very difficult to maintain, and Zac obviously successful personally as well, but you have to have a pretty great employer who's willing to give you off 4 months every 2 years, in addition to interim work and all those other things. And so it does make sense that it's easier for super young and folks that are retired or independently wealthy or own their own businesses, that kind of thing. So I too don't want a full-time legislature, but I think it would move us towards maybe having a few more options of people serving in the legislature that simply can't do it right now.
People have children, people who are in the prime of their careers. We need to make it possible for them to serve. Because you're right. It is the extremes. It's either the very, very young or the very, very old. And some of these very, very young lawmakers, you look at like their addresses on their campaign filing, like they're still living at home.
Right.
And again, not an invalid perspective. Don't get me wrong.
No.
But the thing is we need more from the people who are really kind of shouldering the brunt of what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I don't think just like a Republican perspective isn't more important than a Democrat, I don't think a female perspective is more important than a male, or a young is more important.
No, we're advocating for the mix.
Yeah, the whole mix. You want a mix that represents the state, and that's when we get the best government.
Agreed. This is an odd segue, but I'm speaking of mixed, our mixed race vice president. You like how I did that? That was terrible.
That was pretty good.
I want to preface this by saying that I hate this issue. I think it is so stupid. But I'm gonna say something, because everybody right now, like, I'm reading headlines on the Drudge Report and all this stuff, and everybody's like, "Oh, Trump's gonna hurt from this." He did, his appearance at the Black Journalists Association meeting was a disaster, and it was off the rails. And the thing is all those things are accurate, right? By any objective standard, that was completely off the rails. And by the way, headlines today in Axios was the big delay is he didn't want to go on stage. Like, there were some audio problems, but mostly he didn't want to go on stage because he didn't want to be fact checked in real
time.
What
a world! He doesn't want somebody to tell him you're lying.
Right. I mean, that's some like dictator type stuff.
Right.
But all this assumption that this is bad for him, I think we need to be very, very careful about. Donald Trump, and given how often that I have been wrong about Donald Trump, I have come to respect his political instincts, as odious as I find them, because I didn't think he could win the Republican nomination in 2016. He won it. I didn't think he could win the election in 2016. He won it. He almost won the election in 2020. He did not win the election in 2020, but he almost won it. It was very, very close. He won. He came back from January 6th, and he won the Republican endorsement again, and he could win again this year. And I think the one thing he knows is that, like and so many other people, I don't want to take credit for this analogy, but it's kayfabe, which is the sort of performance that professional wrestlers do, right? Where you're in character all the time, right? Hulk Hogan is always Hulk Hogan. It's a character that he plays. And Donald Trump, he's a wrestling heel. And the one thing about wrestling heels is you go out there and it doesn't matter if the audience loves you, right? Because a wrestling, like the good guy wrestler is called the face, which is a term for baby face. They're the good guy. The bad guy wrestler is the heel. But it doesn't really matter if you're the face or the heel, and Trump's always the heel. It just matters that the audience is engaged. It just matters that the audience is paying attention to you. And Donald Trump has brought this into American politics. And it doesn't matter if the attention he's getting is vitriolic. It doesn't matter if he's getting it for something stupid or something horrific he said, like questioning the race of the vice president, who, by the way, Kamala Harris is black. She's a black woman. Her father is black. Her mother is Indian. She has both of these heritages. Saying that she's not black, I think, is a little ridiculous. Also, I mean, if you look at her, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of times we judge race very superficially. So when things like racism and bigotry manifest itself, it's not based on some deep dive DNA test. It's just based on appearance. She has a lived black experience in the United States of America because she has lived in the United States of America as a black woman. It is a cultural experience more so than anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Donald Trump brought this up because it diverts attention away from Kamala Harris's, frankly, stellar rollout of her campaign. She was getting all the attention. She was taking all the oxygen out of the room. This was Donald Trump getting the attention back on him. And it doesn't matter if it's negative attention. He has planted just enough seeds to get the attention on himself. And I'm telling you, when we pay attention to Donald Trump, when he's at the center of the discussion, he wins.
So I think that's a really interesting perspective. I mean, the one thing that I would push back a little bit on, first of all, we all know what Kamala Harris's race was before this thing, right? I mean, anybody suggesting that somehow she's a chameleon or she changes her race. People like Kevin Kramer, who said, he's just pointing out the fact that she changes the race depending on not.
And I want to address, because one of the quote unquote evidence is people bring up like Associated Press headlines and stuff and talk about her being the first Indian person to hold elected office, some elected office.
You can be both.
Right. And so the thing is, that's a media thing, right? The media loves firsts. And so the thing is that Kamala Harris saying that she's the first, but she wasn't the first black woman to do a lot of these things that she's done in her career, but she was the first Indian woman in her thing. And that's just, that was the media choosing. That was a Kamala Harris choosing. That was the news media kind of loving that headline about somebody being the first something. That's a media thing. So blame the media for that.
Yeah. So what I would say in terms of his performance in front of the African-American journalists, I think everything you're saying, we talked about in previous podcasts that he's going to do something to get the attention, get a little more spotlight on his face there. The one thing that I think is problematic for him, he keeps showing that he cannot interact with women, particularly women of color, in a way that shows any level of respect to them. And what that does is it creates, we've talked about it, I've said it so often, what does Kamala need to do? She needs to increase turnout among women, African-American, and young people. Those three groups see that performance, and that motivates them even more to go out and give money, knock on doors, get out and vote, and get folks out to vote. I think that if he keeps using this race stuff, if they keep saying DEI hire, if J.D. Vance keeps talking about childless cat, all that does is offend a huge group of people who Kamala needs to motivate to get out and vote. And so I think that he's making a mistake here. And we're starting to see it in the polls. There's a Scott Rasmussen poll that shows her up 4 points nationally. That's like a 10-point swing from when Biden was in the race. I think that Trump might be overplaying this thing more than, he wants the attention, but I don't know that this attention is doing him the help that normally it would.
I want so much for your analysis to be true. Here's what scares me, though, is that racism is not just a white people problem. There is racism within these communities, too. There is racism within the black community. There's racism within the Native American communities. I got a text message from a friend of mine who is a Native American here in North Dakota. He's a Republican, and he talked about all the time how his Native American community, a slur that they use is they call him an apple. Red on the outside, white on the inside.
Oh, sure.
That's not me making that up. That's the term. I had to learn it too. I was not aware of this, but that's a slur they use. He talks about, in fact, I made during the Dakota Access Pipeline protest, I made very good friends with a Native American woman who owned property or around the pipeline, and she would talk to me about what they were experiencing. Her husband was white, and she experienced the same thing. And I think what Donald Trump is doing, and it's nefarious and it's disgusting because this is how he wins, is by dividing us. But I think what he is saying, I think the assumption is he's saying that for racist white voters. And he's not. His audience for that is the black community or the Hispanic community, and finding just enough people in there to peel away to say, oh, she's not authentically black. For black people to conclude that Kamala Harris is not authentically black. That's his target audience. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing. And I'm afraid that it's going to work, Chad. Because, again, Donald Trump has enjoyed, Democrats still dominate among black voters, et cetera, et cetera. But he has enjoyed more support from that community than past Republicans who have not been nearly as salacious and inflammatory about racial issues as Donald Trump has. How do you explain that? If not the fact that it works.
Yeah, against Joe Biden, right? I still want to see if we know. But
even Kamala Harris is not getting anywhere near the sort of coalition support from black community, Hispanic community, et cetera, that Barack Obama did. She's nowhere near it.
At this point. Again, we have to remember we're 12 days into her presidential campaign. But I want to point out something else that Trump has done beyond the comments about at the journalism event. I mean, last night was a really historic, yesterday and last night, of these hostages coming home. And generally, when we bring home hostages, that's something we can all get behind. I mean, that's something that I mean, did you watch the video of them landing at the Air Force Base last night by chance? I mean, it was really moving stuff. When you see a mom connecting with her kid, or a mother coming off the plane and her children are there, and Trump can't help himself. He still says, well, Biden's terrible, and, I would have gotten it done. And Biden pointed out, then why didn't you when you were president? Because the former Marine was in Russian hands. I think that this division, and we talked about the last one, can you win on a vibe? I still think even when great things happen, Donald Trump somehow tries to make it negative, tries to make it somehow something that drives a wedge between us. I don't think that's going to work. Or I hope that doesn't work. And I don't think it's going to work, because last night was a great night for America. It was a great night for the Biden administration, but mostly for the country and the world. And Donald Trump was still negative and still attacking folks. And I just think he seems desperate right now, that the world has changed so dramatically for him in the last 2 weeks that he can't help himself. And maybe you're right. The more that he has some publicity on him, the better it is for him. But I'm hoping that folks want a more optimistic future. I believe Americans love their country and they see positivity, and all he talks about is bad things.
I want so much for you to believe. I want voters to start rejecting political leaders who campaign on making us hate one another, right? Whether it's Hillary Clinton talking about deplorables, or it's Donald Trump talking about horrible, nasty, liberal, however he says it, all the terrible things he says. I want us to reject political leaders like that. So Kamala, even though I'm not excited about Kamala Harris's policies, I almost feel like we're beyond that right now. I need a different mindset to be successful in America. I need something different to happen. I need voters to want something different from their leaders. And I think one of the things Kamala, despite my policy differences with her, I feel like one of the things she can deliver is that vibe where we're all Americans. We're going to work together. We're going to figure this out. Republicans aren't evil. That's what I want. Like, people who look different than you or whatever. That's what I want. I hope she can execute it, and I hope it's successful. I am terrified that it's not going to be.
So I also thought last night the way that Biden handled, how did this happen, and him talking about it's through relationships. We have to have these friends, and really gave credit to the Slovakian and German leadership on getting this prisoner exchange done. I thought that was also an interesting perspective, right? We're not in this, but it's not just the United States in it by ourselves. If we want to stand up to Russia, if we want to stand up to China, we need to have allies around this world, and we need to have relationships with those folks. I also question if Donald Trump can do that. If he can have relationships with people beyond just sort of walking in and saying, we're the United States and we have the biggest muscles and you're going to do what we say, that's not diplomacy. And I think diplomacy worked last night. I thought last night was super moving and super great for our country.
And the thing is, if you roll back and you listen closely to speeches that people like George W. Bush gave around the time that we were invading Iraq and Afghanistan, and by the way, you look at the coalition of countries who went with us on that, even though, you could say what you want about, Iraq specifically, and I think looking back on it as a supporter of that war, that was a mistake in retrospect. However, he built a coalition around it, right? Ronald Reagan, right? For all his soaring, and I think maybe a knock on Reagan is maybe he was too nationalistic at times. Reagan built coalitions. That's how diplomacy works. This idea that America could just go it alone. We are a singular power and a singular influence in the world. There's no question about it. But part of that influence is the coalition of allies we have around us. Our friends, the Canadians, our friends, the British, our friends, the French, right? When the world has needed it, that's the coalition, and others. I'm just, that's hardly an exhaustive list. Our friends in Sweden, our friends in Norway, right? We, all of them, like we work together. That is when we have accomplished great things in the world. So Donald Trump's, singular, but again, it doesn't matter, right? I feel like when I'm explaining this nuance to people, they're rolling their eyes because they like the vision that Donald Trump's, it just makes them feel a certain way. I think he taps in, Donald Trump is very, very good at tapping into our basest instincts to just be suspicious and antagonistic towards people we don't like. He is fantastic at it. And, again, until voters want something different than that, I'm afraid he's going to win.
Yeah, it's hard for me, and I don't think anybody would say, "Oh, that Chad Oban, he sure is optimistic." But I do want. I mean, the in my lifetime, the politicians who have excited me and I've wanted to get behind are those folks that are bringing happiness and joy and bringing people together. I was thinking about it the other day, and this is sort of probably silly, but I love going to live music events, and part of going to a concert is being around a bunch of people who are feeling the same level of joy and singing along in this community that is created there. That's what I want in my politics too. I watch a Kamala Harris rally, and I say, I don't know if you've seen the white kid dancing behind the stage down in Atlanta, and he's like rapping along and whatever. The joy he had in this group of 15,000 people all feeling the same thing and feeling this sense of community, that's what I want in my politics. I don't want my politics. I mean, and that's why I think that even Biden's campaign being so focused on Trump and saving democracy and all that kind of stuff might have been too looking in the past. That I still think that people at the end of the day want to be excited about something. They want to have optimism. They want to think about their kids doing well into the future. And that's what we want from our elections. I hope
you're right.
Yeah.
Because I'm afraid that Americans still want something different, and until it really burns them, until there are real consequences for it, I'm afraid it's not going to change.
Well, what do you think those real consequences are? What are they? I mean, if not after January 6th, what? I mean, the fact that some people still can't understand, and smart people still can't seem to understand or to want to understand how dangerously close we were on January 6th.
I think it has to hit them personally. For most Americans, January 6th is something they experienced on television.
But what if hung Mike Pence? Then do you think it would have worked? Then maybe. Do you think people would have woken up?
Maybe, but I'm afraid it's like war. I'm afraid it's like China takes a step that puts us in a position where we have to respond, or Russia. I'm afraid we find ourselves like that, or the old coalitions fail because Donald Trump chipped away far enough at NATO, where and that's the thing. Like they talk America first and all this stuff, and this very isolationist attitude, and they think, well, it's going to keep us out of wars. Not in the long run, it's not. Not in the long run, it's not. If we're not working with our allies, if we're not being proactive about these things, in the long run, that leads to worse wars.
Right. Yeah. It's so it's not often that I'm in a conversation with any other human being where I'm the optimist, Rob. So I think
I am definitely an Eeyore by nature, and the thing is like it's coming from a place of love. Like I'm not trying to be negative on purpose. When I look at things, if it seems too good to be true, it's probably not true, or if, at least at the very least, it's probably a lot more complicated than it looks like. And maybe that comes to the nature. I'm a very different person. I don't like going to concerts that much. I get the appeal. I would rather be at home with a book.
Right.
Is how I like to spend my free time. So I maybe it's my nature, but I have been burned so many times by this. And again, watching January 6th, and people, I still get the crap. Oh, Port's changed. He's a traitor to the Republicans and conservatives and everything. And I don't think watching January 6th was such an inflection point for me personally, and how angry I was to see somebody waving the Confederate flag in our Congress, to see people treating our Congress that way. And obviously the act itself trying to subvert a free and fair election, it disgusted me. But I've been burned by this so many times. I have watched so many of my friends give into this and just not care. I mean, most recently, the stuff about the national debt. We just passed $35 trillion in national debt. Democrats aren't talking about it, and Republicans aren't talking about it, and maybe this is me being unfair, but I'm more angry that Republicans aren't talking about it because from my perspective, they're supposed to be the party of fiscal responsibility, and they're not talking about it anymore. And now on Twitter, I have friends who, once upon a time, I would have long conversations about the national debt and the deficit, are now telling me, it doesn't matter anymore because they're just so enamored with, we got to dunk the liberals. We have to be against whatever the liberals are for. If Kamala Harris is for something, we're against it. And the principle of it doesn't matter anymore. So I feel like I have come by my cynicism, honestly, because I have watched a political movement that I feel was built on a lot of good ideas and a lot of principles. Not that conservatives and Republicans had a monopoly on good ideas, but generally, I think they were serious people working from a place of patriotism. I have watched that crumble and turn into something else. And I don't know when it's going to stop.
Yeah, I think your point where you said you talked to somebody on the right who thought school lunch was a really good idea, but then expressing some concern that there might be partisanship that becomes part of this. That makes me sick. If you've got people who are looking at this, and I think it's going to, that issue specifically, if Tim Walz is the VP and he's talking about I'm feeding kids instead of banning books, that kind of thing, I think Republicans are going to dig their heels in even further, even though it's good policy moving forward. So I don't know.
I cut off our nose to spite our face because we can't agree with Tim Walz on a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and I just, it's amazing to think about somebody like Kent Conrad, and I think you wrote about this, how he made his whole career on the debt and was unsuccessful at bringing it down. But at least he and Judd Gregg, was that his name, from New Hampshire, Republican, they were talking about it all the time. I mean, you couldn't get away.
Paul Ryan would talk about it all the time. Where's Paul Ryan now? He's been exiled.
And I also think it's interesting, we talked about this earlier, Democrats are the party of freedom right now, and individual liberty. So often it's upside down. I mean, it's a realignment. And maybe, I mean, if Democrats could provide me an option on the ballot where I felt comfortable, where I really did feel, because I mean, one of the things I struggled with Democrats is a lot of times it is big bureaucracy. A lot of times it is, some of the nanny state stuff I think was not unfair criticism. We got a little carried away with, and now it's just the opposite. And now we have the far right is the one who wants me to tell me how to put my family together, wants to tell me what my kids can read, wants to tell me everything my kids can and cannot do. It's crazy.
Well, that's the problem we're up against time here, but that is the problem when your political movement is organized not around ideas, but just opposing whatever the other side is for. You know what that does? Is that puts your opponents in control of what you believe.
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way. An idea should be good or bad on its merits, not the people who organize against it. You should want Democrats. If you're a Republican and it's a good idea, you should want Democrats to support your idea. Anyway, we got to go.
So, hey, Rob, the next time we talk, I think there's going to be a Democrat VP.
Oh, yeah. I think by this weekend, right? I mean, we should know.
Yeah, because we start the tour on Tuesday, so I think
should we make a little not a wager? The Attorney General might be listening, so we might get in trouble for illegal gambling if we make a bet. But
yeah, we could bet Canadian dollars. That's not real money.
After all our talk about forming our good friends, the Canadians, who have been
listen, I was just in Winnipeg, loving Winnipeg as you're down here crapping all over Winnipeg. So don't even attack me on this one.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's going to be Shapiro.
Say I'm going to take two picks. I'm going to say Walz or Kelly.
Walz or Kelly. I feel like Walz is your heart speaking and Kelly is your brain speaking.
I think that's fair. I love Tim Walz. And I know that, I read your column obviously about some of the policy things and but he can talk the talk. I mean, he's relatable. I love that people are making fun of him for that him and Kamala were the same age, but he looks about 20 years older. And he responded with, well, I was a teacher for 15 years. That's what happened. That's good stuff.
That is pretty good. He is very good on television. I think the mistake that Democrats could make is they're assuming that he's because Minnesota, that he's going to have more appeal, more centrist appeal than he really will. I think that's a mistake they make. Like all those flyover states are the same. No, Minnesota's a very different place. And in particular, Minnesota's elections are weird because basically you win Minneapolis, you win.
Hey, listen, Tim Walz served a congressional delegation or a district that did not include the Twin Cities.
I think Walz would be a mistake. I think Kelly would be good. My heart, I really kind of like Shapiro, mostly because I would like to see, maybe it's a dangerous thing, but if Democrats have to move to the middle, maybe they have to move away from, some of the strong frankly, I mean, there are elements of the Democratic coalition, the Progressive Coalition that have some anti-Semitic problems. There's a part of me that thinks that putting a Jewish man on the ticket would be a good move, but I mean, it's a gamble. It's a risk, but I think Shapiro will be good. I think Kelly would also be very good.
So I saw somebody on Twitter say that if Kamala nominates Shapiro, that she's no longer voting for the Democrat ticket, and somebody responded with, "Really? That Trump is the other guy," and that's sort of your line in the sand, is that you don't want the Jewish guy to be the vice president, or I mean, it's just.
I think if you put Shapiro on the ticket, I think some very ugly things about how some Democrats feel about Jewish people are going to be revealed.
Yeah, I said on Twitter the other day that my picks were Walz, Kelly, and anybody who's not J.D. Vance. So I'm a pretty easy target. Hey, Doug Burgum might be back in the running again under that theory of anybody.
Wouldn't that be, I still would fall in love. Just shock the nation and pick a Republican.
In all seriousness, though, Rob, how much is Donald Trump kicking himself that he did not pick Doug Burgum right now?
Or even a Marco Rubio.
Yeah, I mean, part of the enthusiasm around Kamala is because of the J.D. Vance screwing up all the time. Just like, again, the first goal of VP needs to be do no harm. J.D. Vance is harming that ticket.
Do you think J.D. Vance wears eyeliner?
Question I was not prepared to answer. I think he may.
The thing is, I don't care. He can wear all the makeup he wants. He can wear lipstick for all I care.
His eyes pop, though.
But I will tell you, somebody said it. This man is wearing eyeliner, and now I can't unsee it. Like, every time I look at him, it's like, does he have eyeliner, or does he just have gorgeous lashes? I don't know.
Yeah, it's one or the other. Usually we end with baseball, but I think we should end with gorgeous lashes.
Gorgeous lashes. All right, we will.
Have a good weekend, Rob.
Have a good weekend. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening, whatever platform you're listening on this, if you would give us a thumbs up or a like or a review or stars or something like that, that really helps us out. And we'll be back again with more Plain Talk next week. Thank you for listening.